Tell you what, it's time to get the, usually you do this in the fall or the spring, but we need to brush cut the saplings off the fence trails eventually, because otherwise you lose your fences because then the saplings get too big. I added the cylinder on here. This was just a piece of flat bar before, and then I fixed this thing a number of times. So I welded the angle iron, me and my uncle put this thing there. We bolted it, but that didn't stay working, so we just welded it there. The bolts that hold it into the frame are fine. And then I just welded these things. It's kind of a weird place to weld them, but I welded them to support the frame of this thing, because all the pulling force from the third point of this hydraulic, this tinfoil guard is the whole mounting point. Stupid design. It's ridiculous. So I just welded these. So I made it so that if you really needed to take it off, you could still take it off. You just cut that with an angle grinder. And then you just pull these bolts out. And then I just welded the gearbox to the frame. And I think that's a cast iron gearbox, but whatever it is, it's not breaking, so that's good. But this brush cutter is it's been worked pretty hard, I think. The previous owners did a number on it, but these things are so simple. Now, if a gearbox ever broke, you're just gonna buy another mower, because it's that simple. There's like nothing to it. All the gearbox and the blade under there. But the plan is to put a slip clutch in here, because it used to have a shear bolt system where this would be in there, and then the bolt would break. But the bolt just broke all the time, so it needed a slip clutch. So we're gonna add that, and I think that should be fine. But yeah, so, and then I'll grease this up, whatever grease nipples I can find. The blades, probably should take those off and sharpen them. So I think I'll do that. Take the blades off, sharpen them, and grease it. Just kind of a service, and install that slip clutch. Also, I put this thing on here. This is a good container. You can put a chainsaw in there. And I keep the wrenches for putting the bolt through, because these pins sometimes fall off for no reason. So I'm gonna put these on there. This is a good, like, I drilled holes, bolt this thing down. Doesn't collect water. Really doesn't collect any water at all. There's no water in there. But this is a great container. Then you can keep a chainsaw on there. And then if you have a really awkward tractor like this one that you can't put a chainsaw anywhere, put it in there. You can use that for anything. Put anything you want in there. So I see that hitch is I think the hitch is a bit low, because the shaft has to go through here. So we'll just remove it. That's a drawbar, actually. on there. It's like 30 degrees today. These things are strong. These aren't gonna just fall out like those. Those things go missing sometimes for some reason. Doesn't take too long with wrenches. Same thing on the other side. I've heard lots of people complain that these old junk grease guns don't work, but somehow some of these like 40-year-old grease guns do still work. But what happens is the ends just wear out. So if you get your ends replaced, if the nipple's not worn out, the end is worn out. And then at that point, usually they work okay. Like this one's fine. It's not brand new, but this one seems to work okay. But the long handles are the annoying part. Hasn't been greased in a while, so do that. These things should just be bolts. I don't know why they're wing nuts. There's a bunch of wire stuck in there. It still turns though, so. And to get that out of there, I have to take that whole round thing off. I'm not doing that. That's too much work. I think this mower is about 12 years old. The mower isn't quite that old, but it's kind of acting like it. It's not built that strong. I don't think they sell these tools in the store. A punch holder. I made this thing from scratch. I think maybe the one thing I should have done is made like a little handle or something so it's easier to grip. Because I can't quite, it's kind of slippery here. So if I got like I don't know, if I had a lathe, I could make this like a tapered, or it gives it like traction. The lathe has a wheel that makes ruts and then you can hold stuff better. But I made that. It works. It actually broke here. I had to weld it up again. Works pretty good though. That's the one problem it has, is it doesn't like to stay tight. Actually, what I could do is just I could bring these to fix this, or make another one. Have these threads longer, and then weld a piece of metal onto another nut, and then you can back the nut into this one to make it stay there. So you tighten it, and then you could back it up, that second nut. So I could invent something. This thing is it's like almost not worth using the way it is. That shouldn't be that stiff. I should probably grind the top of that down so it's easier to take out next time. Sounds like I'm being an idiot for leaving the wire in there, but that's not going to break it. I think it's fine. These pins get stuck in there, and then I just think I hammered on it, and it's like mushrooming or something. Fine. That took about 100,000 times more effort than it should have. That should just fall out of there, actually. So something needs to be fixed. These pins are damaged. They're stuck in there, kind of. So what I'm going to do is grind these pins down so they're small. Because them being the right size doesn't work. These are heavy-duty blades, too. These are thick. Hardened steel. These are some chunky blades. They're getting pretty dull, though. It's time to sharpen them. I think I'll use since this is such big steel, I'm going to use the big grinder in that vise. Okay, but these blades are sharpened. They're really hot. They're sharpened pretty good. They're not the best, but I'd have to do a lot more grinding. No, they're okay. I think that's good, especially for just cutting saplings. You don't need it to be razor sharp. It's a good line. I cheated, went under a little bit, but that's about right. These things just get dull so easily, so that's about right. So now I'm gonna fix these pins because they're a problem. They need to be modified a bit. So, I mean, really, I should just like file that hole a little bigger. But I'm just gonna work with the pins. It's easier. So I'm gonna grind the pins down so they fit in there looser, so they don't get so wedged in there like before. This thing's broken. The reason that's broken is because this is not straight. So I kind of have an idea on how to fix that. I was originally thinking, to fix this, I was originally thinking put a piece of rubber between here, like a motor mount. But this is a welding table, so I think a piece of wood is going to be better, and then I'm going to grind that. So the wood has a little bit of flexibility, but the reason this broke here is, and then something happened to it. Yeah, this is the same part. It's a tiny bit different, but I think that'll work. And that's for scrap bin, so that's where that belongs. They should make this stuff out of steel, not cast iron. There's a lump right there. Grind that off. That's part of the problem. Let's use this like 65-year-old drill. Or it might be older than that. Some of these old tools, these electric tools, they were built to last. And I think the only reason people throw them away is because the cords stop working. Or the wires in there sometimes come loose and then you can't figure out why they don't work. But some of these tools, like like the grinder I was using earlier, that's like almost an 80-year-old grinder. That was old when, like my uncle, when they first moved here, that grinder was old. I think a friend of my uncle gave it to him, and the friend had had that grinder for a long time, almost 40 years. And then that grinder spent another 40 years here, so that's almost 80, well, maybe not exactly 40 years, but that could be like 60, 50-year-old grinder. The same thing with this drill. I mean, I don't know the story on the drill, but it is a very old drill. And it still works fine. Okay, drilling holes takes forever. There's no way I'm going to wait that long. And also, there's too many other old holes. So I have to just weld it. Okay, well this is fixed. I've welded cast iron before. The first time I welded cast iron was this vise. I welded these larger clamps. These are steel and this is cast iron. I welded that. That's been super strong. You just got to weld it everywhere you possibly can. But, as long as the weld metal kind of melts the cast iron, it bonds better. And these broke once. But after the second time of welding it, it was fine. So, I think you can weld cast iron. Just weld it everywhere. Now, I welded it here because if it did break, I may take that off and just get a bigger vise. Because this is small. it's old, it's small. I think it really should be a bigger vise here. So, no, that's why. And if it breaks, then I'll just weld it some more. Weld all in here. So that's pretty good. Now, about every time I clamp something in here, about 1,000 of these, or about 100,000 times of clamping anything is equal to one time you'd need to move this thing. And I've only needed to move this once since I put this in here 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. So, actually, first of all, I forgot to put these, I guess the bolts were in there, but they're not really going to fit because this bottom part is slightly different, so. I mean, I can still turn that. You don't really even need those in there because I just drilled a hole in the bottom, and then you just loosen that when you want to turn it. So I think that's just as easy. It might even be a better system. So I can still turn that. This is fixed for as long as I want it to be. Like if I just hit really hard right here with a hammer, it would probably just break that right off if I wanted to. So, that's fixed for now. I can always change that. So if anybody's looking for a cheap grinder you can get at Princess Auto, I recommend this. This is the Princess Auto grinder, the Power Fist logo. And I don't know if these are expensive or cheap. I don't think these are very expensive grinders. But this grinder is about 5-6 years old. And this is actually one of my favorite grinders. This is a really good tool. So before you spend money on expensive Makitas or whatever you're buying, I would recommend, if these things are cheap. I don't actually know the price, but usually Princess Auto stuff is pretty cheap. It also has a speed dial here at the back, which I like too. That's handy. But yeah, this is a good Princess Auto tool. Some Princess Auto stuff. Now a bad model of Princess Auto grinder is this thing. And I haven't, my uncle bought this. I actually let him know that. I let him know this is not a very good brand. These are really cheap, but these have they have a weird type of switch that I don't like. And so I don't know what we're gonna do with this. Are we gonna return it? Or we're gonna keep it? That's why it's still here. But see, these switches with the lock, you have to push that, and then the switch doesn't stay on, which means if you're in a weird place, you can't just have one hand using it. You always have to have your hand like that, and what's going on with this tripod? You always got to have your hand on there, and if it if you let go of it for a minute, you got to push that, and then the other problem is these switches just break for no reason, and then they get stuck, and then they don't work, and then the electric motor can sometimes have problems. Now, the reason I know that is because years ago, like 10 years ago, my uncle bought one, the same model, and it wasn't even that old, and the switch just fell apart, and I took it all apart, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. So, and also, these things are longer than they need to be. I compare that to this grinder. Put those two things together. It's not too bad, but the switch is up here. I like these style of grinders so much better. Okay, well, I did this to both sides, so I beveled up here and right there, and I ground this down a bit, so it's a smaller diameter. I ground it here. So that way, if I'm pounding on this, it won't mushroom and wedge in there. Because if that happens, that can be a problem. But yeah, I'm noticing they're not going quite in there, so the problem is in here as well. It's on both things, the pins and those holes. So now I took care of the pins, but I'm gonna get a file and just file it down in there. I think there's a bit of a bevel that's curled over from. The pins might just be worn out to the point where you replace them, but that's how they're supposed to be. They're supposed to fit in there nicely, and I ground it so they're a little bit loose. That way you can hammer on them, and they won't get stuck in there. See, I like how those just stay because there's weight on this end. So when the pin goes in there, it kind of goes like that, and then it wedges, so it just kind of stays in there. Now you put one of these on there. Just like that. I think that's good. It only bends the bottom, it won't bend it up here, so I have an idea. I'm gonna weld a tool for that. So I'm gonna weld these chunks together. I'll cut that, weld that, and then put a handle on this tool. And this is just a spacer, that'll come out. And then these two bars will go over top of that, and that'll be a bending tool to fix that. decided to take till like 11 o'clock at night to make this tool super shiny. So, I don't know, I just figured why not. So I mainly used this I used this grinding disc to get most of the rust off, and I polished it up with this. And I did a little bit with this thing. It doesn't really do much, but it kind of shines it up. I barely use that at all. But now this is looking like a factory-made steel bending tool. I mean, it's going to rust eventually, but it's shiny for now. So, that's it. I built this heavy duty too, so everything's thick steel. So, that way, it's still almost too hot to touch from welding and grinding, and just the heat spread out throughout the whole thing. And it never really cooled off because of all the grinding. So I can kind of hardly touch it, but so it's got two jaws, and then there's a plate on either side, and then a back plate, and then I ground a bevel, and then this is sitting on it at an angle, and then I just welded up everywhere where I thought it needed it. Make that nice and strong. And I made it a little thicker, that way, there's lots of room for steel. So it's strong here, so you get more torque on everything. And also, this bar, I know that's short, but I made it so you can put a longer bar on. So now this is a good handheld handle, but you can easily put an extension bar on that. So that you can, it'll bend stuff like this. Hopefully. So basically a metal bending tool is what I just made. I could have welded my name in there, but I'd rather not. Because this is something that anybody can build. So with scrap steel, anybody can build this. No, I just use this little flex core welder to weld all this stuff together. And, this flapping disc, shine it up, make it nice and shiny. Now I use that file to file the rust in there. I should have just got rid of that earlier, but it's good now. Nice. It's functional. Pretty funny looking tool. But I welded that. I think that's a strong tool. I think to get under there, I need to lift that up a bit more. That hydraulic cylinder is nice, because then if you're going in a ditch or something, you can lift the brush cutter up. And this thing is still never going to be perfect. It's a lot of work to try to get that out completely. Hot day today. Well, I think that's as good as I'm gonna get it. This tool setup is the best thing I've ever made. I didn't even plan that to go in there. It just fits in there. This is an old thing off of a truck. About 20-something years ago, this farm had a trucking business. They had 3 trucks, big trucks. They had a logging truck and 2 flat deck trucks. But they never drive them. They own the trucks, and they just hired drivers. Actually, there's a chart on the wall here. I think some of their, I don't know what that is, but I don't even know what the trucks look like. This was a long time ago, like 20-something years ago. So back in the 90s or something, they had a trucking business. Or ended in 2000 maybe. But yeah. But there's actually lots of old truck parts here. Like in that bin up there is lots of old truck parts. And there's not a huge amount of old truck parts, but there's a few. So now I'm gonna figure out what I want to weld on here to make a bumper, because I'm positive that thing's gonna get dented again. This is kind of turning into a bigger job than I was expecting, but originally I wasn't even planning on fixing that. But to do it right, I got this from the scrapyard. We were getting rid of a bunch of old rusted engine blocks from down there. Yeah, they were engine blocks. You can't use them for building, so normally I keep literally as much as I can from being scrapped, unless I know that you can't use it as a building material somehow. So something like they had a pile of, I should have gotten more of this, because this is perfectly good stuff. It was just getting scrapped. I should have got way more of these. There was more there. But we got, there wasn't a lot, but I got some of the good ones. So got that from the scrapyard. And I'm gonna just cut chunks of it to fit here, and then I'll weld them together. Weld them on here. And then I may or may not weld rebar on the bottom of this to make it even stronger. It's not going to be a bulldozer, but to stop it from bending, because in the shape, like this steel, that's like paper thin steel. Well, not paper thin, but that's way too thin. This whole piece should be that thickness or more. So I'm gonna cut chunks to fit everywhere, and then I'll weld them together, weld them on there. So to make shapes to fit on there, I'm gonna use this piece of cardboard. I think if I flip this over, it'll fit the other side as well. The same angle. So figure something out. I know this piece is bent quite a bit. It's bent, but it doesn't matter. It'll be, it's gonna need to be clamped hard anyway. But I think everything turned out pretty good. Not the best. Okay, well, all the pieces are tacked on. I measured a couple of them wrong. They're too short. But they're all tacked on. They look like they're like not on there, but the clamp will take care of that. This thickness of metal I've clamped before. It's a big clamp, it's fine. So I'll clamp it all down and it'll all look nice in the end. I'm gonna weld in here and in there. I almost was thinking to just plasma cut holes in there, but I don't think that's necessary. I think if I just weld it on the top and the bottom, it'll be fine. If you were doing a big sheet of steel, then you would want to make holes in it. Like if you were like if you were putting a piece of steel over another piece of steel that was big, then you'd want to cut holes in it. But and also I left a gap underneath. I'm gonna weld it underneath. That's why that gap's there. And then I'm thinking on top of this, I mean, this will make it really strong. So yeah, I was going to use this big arc welder to weld everything, but the box of rods I had that were the right size I think they were old, so I didn't bother using the arc welder. I just used the small welder. Popped the breaker a couple times, but then afterwards, it started to work pretty good. Well, I took a break. I went for a swim in our lake. Took the quad and the dogs. I think that's the first time I called Rocky out. It was in the water. And I called him and he came out and swam. So he knows how to swim. That's the first obvious bit of swimming he's done. So just keep clamping it, hammering it, and eventually it'll all get welded like this. There's little tacks everywhere. I think that's strong, but we'll find out. If it breaks, then I'll know it's not strong and I'll know how to do it better next time. But I think that's a good amount of tack. Well, it's not really tack welding, but it's a good amount of welding. It doesn't need to be, like the ends are solid, so the sides are not too bad. So just keep doing more long hours of welding. I'm almost done though. I'll just finish up this area. See how it's like bowed down there. But I did pretty good here. I just got the sledgehammer and went all out on it. And it bashed it in enough that it's clampable. Same thing with this one. Like this is just, that's just this sheet sticking up. Just keep clamping and welding. Not that interesting, but let's continue that. And I could paint this, but I like it better not painted because it's going to get messy anyway if I paint it. I had a bunch of old sockets that were stripped, so I welded one onto the end of this clamp. I didn't explain what I was doing at the time. I don't know why, but I'm welding one of those as a it's a quarter inch socket. And that way you can use a ratchet on there. And that made a huge difference. I recommend doing this to any bigger sized clamp. It actually ended up working really well. Because that way you could use the ratchet and then I had more leverage and then you wouldn't have to twist your hand as much. You could just use the ratchet. And it's hard to explain, but it did make a big difference welding that stripped out socket on there. if you're gonna buy a welder that'll last 4 years and then die, it would be the Princess Auto welder. This stupid thing just melted the end of the tip. Piece of junk. Don't buy these. Mastercraft. This is a bad welder. It welds like crap. You can hear it. I don't know why it does that, but that welder is just not designed right. So we should return that. I'm not going to use it anymore until we return it, if you can. But I put some pieces of metal in here. Everything's welded. Everything's done. So that's strong enough. I don't think I need to put rebar in here. So this took all day. But because welders are not very fast, they're pretty slow. So I got welded underneath. So now this is fixed. So I think this thing is pretty well ready to go test. So I'm going to scout out a place with a quad so we can go test this. I'm not going to do a whole bunch because I want to put the drive shaft in my truck, and then I'm going to start putting all the tools back. Everything is just everywhere. It's really ugly looking. But I just want to get my truck fixed. And then once I have that one fixed, this one will wait for a starter. It's not essential, though. This thing looks good, though. Now, if it didn't have rust, I would buy one of these brand new in the 80s. Same thing with that truck. I'd probably buy one of those brand new, too. And that, if I say that, that means, well, not a today's new one, a new one in the 90s. And a new one of these in the 80s. Because those are, anything earlier than 90s is usually a good vehicle. The same thing with my quad. I would buy probably 3 of those brand new in 98. I like the design. There's almost nothing electrical on it. I don't know what's wrong with the factories, but this quad is so simple. I think they could have invented these back in the 60s. I don't know why they didn't have, these things would sell like wildfire if they made these in the 60s. This thing is so simple. They had snowmobiles. They could have easily designed this very ATV, everything on it, in the 60s. So I don't know why they waited so long to make a good quad. Actually, I think they started making this model in the 80s. But still, this thing is so simple, they could have designed this way earlier than that. They had motorcycles. They had virtually the same engine and transmission in the 60s. So I don't see why they don't design one of these. I fixed this thing. I forgot to record it, but I fixed the throttle. So now let's go test this thing. I've used a patch of light brush for that cutter. I've done a lot heavier. I've actually done it here before. But last winter I was with a bunch of neighbors. They were doing I forgot what you call it, but I had the Bearcat. This is before I got my Summit. And I think I crashed right down in here. So I came up here. It was super deep snow. It was like 3 feet, 2 feet of powder. And so I was coming along, and I just bogged down and just got really stuck in there. And they helped me get out. So I'm going to try to cut all this junk out of here if I can get it. And then all this green stuff as well. So in this shot, you can see that I backed up to that log, and then things started smoking a lot. And I think what that was is the seal that goes around, like the seal on the edge of the bearing, underneath the gearbox. That seal blew, and then oil started leaking out. And then the blades were turning so fast, they were just like combusting the oil or something, and that's smoking. I'm not exactly sure. I looked at it later on, and I saw that there was oil underneath, so somehow the gear oil or something leaked out of it. I don't know how it could do that, but I think that's what happened. But that brush cutter is built terribly. I mean, that gearbox should be way bigger than the one they put in there anyway. Yeah, well, maybe that log was a little too big for it, but, I cut through that. I think I hit a rock or something, or a bunch of dust. That's why I'm making all that smoky stuff. I'm pretty sure that was dust. But, well, this is nice and strong now. No, they should have just put those on there in the factory. But I'm going to do a lot more filming with this thing until it breaks. This thing always sounds a bit weird, so. This mower is, I think what it is, this mower is not built right, because I think that gearbox and the shaft need to be bigger. Well, really, also, I think this machine, I know it's small, but I think really it's meant to have a 100 horsepower tractor on it. So this whole machine doesn't make sense. But really, you need you need a lot more power, but then the thing is so narrow that your tractor, the wheels would stick out on both sides. So this brush cutter is not designed right. But we have to put up with it. No, if it breaks, it breaks. There's really nothing we can do about it. Because this thing, it's a brush cutter. It's meant for doing brush, but it's just so weak, it doesn't make any sense. The whole frame is like super weak. So, I don't know. It's a weird design. The hydraulics don't work right on this thing either. Something's wrong with it. I hate this tractor though. I like most old tractors, but this is a piece of junk. This tractor leaks oil on almost every place. Has barely ever been used. And to fix all that, you just take the whole tractor apart and reseal everything. So it's not worth fixing. We got this tractor for free, too. It came with a property that my mom bought. So, it's not bad for a free tractor, but still, it's just such a piece of junk. The engine doesn't rev up enough. It's a really old design of engine. Both of these machines aren't going to last very long. I'm sure they're, I don't know why, but both of these, the tractor and the brush cutter, are both kind of not designed right. So I don't know how long either one of these machines is going to last. But it does a good job. I admit that log was too big. I shouldn't have gone over there. But yeah, it did what I wanted it to, but it just won't go on big dead trees over there. But as long as you're doing brush with it, it's fine. Just keep the RPM up. And this thing actually has two low ranges. Like I hit a few rocks. That always happens. You can't avoid that. But this thing has 3 low ranges, so it has one low that way, and then has high, and then this way is also a really low. And that's helpful for brush cutting. Then you have more control. So this is more of a fixing this thing video, but I'm definitely going to use this when I get time. Maybe after haying, or on the rainy days when we're not haying. Okay, well, this thing works good on the lighter brush. I shouldn't have gone and... Well, it cut through that tree. It was dead, but it probably would have been better if I didn't do that. But it cut everything else the way I wanted it to. But The one, I don't know how long that gearbox is going to last. Because it was shaking. And I had to weld it. You know, the gearbox is the mower now. So, because I had to weld the gearbox to the mower. Because the mounts were broken. And the gearbox was moving. And and then it needs a slip clutch to work. It doesn't really work without one. The shear bolt system is stupid. Because the bolts are supposed to break. They break and then you have to change them. And then sometimes they break just turning the tractor on. If the drivetrain on this mower were bigger, like the gearbox was bigger, more heavy duty, the slip clutch was much bigger, and this shaft was a little longer, and there was a bearing here to support this. And the shaft might be okay, but a thicker shaft would be better. So if you had all of those parts thicker, this thing would work much better. And the tractor really isn't the best on here. The hydraulics don't quite work properly. I don't know why, but they work, but they're weird. But I'll do more videos of using this thing later on. So I guess that's it for this video.